are no essential carbohydrates whatsoever. None. Zilch, zippo. Telling people to have at least 55% of their diet in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't even need is the starting point that's wrong. You think snacking on an apple is super healthy. You just put into the bloodstream 2.5 times the glucose that it wants. And actually it was quite happy. It was in balance. It's now got to get those 10 grams of glucose out of the bloodstream. When people say, oh, you need fiber for your gut microbiome. No, you don't. You just need dairy products. Fiber is a subset of carbohydrate. Fiber is only found in carbohydrates. If there are no essential carbohydrates, there is no need for fiber. The technical definition of fiber is indigestible many sugars. How is that good for you? But it is really easy and you can do it, and it's going to make you feel so much better that your only regret will be that you wished you'd done it sooner.
What would you say is the biggest mistake you see people making when it comes to diet that's having a negative impact on their health?
Wow, that's there's no warm up, is there, with you? Straight in.
And I know there's a lot there, but let's pick one and then we can pivot off that.
Biggest thing that they do wrong. Because my number one criteria, if people say to me, what should I eat? I say eat real food. So I guess the converse of that would be if people are doing something wrong, if there's any stuff that you're eating that's fake processed food, like why are you doing it? There's always something better that you could be eating. So that would probably be the number one thing. And then a lot of things would go from that because you then get into bad habits, food addiction, displacing nutrients and all the rest of it. So yeah, that'd probably be the number one for me.
Well, I think a good place to go from there is to talk about macronutrients. And so that's protein, fat, and carbohydrates. How do you look at that template for people that are already embracing real food?
So this was a real penny drop moment for me. And it's one of those things that when you look at it, it's like, well, of course you should know that. But I just remember the first time it dawned on me. So my PhD was looking at the dietary fat guidelines. And when I realized that protein actually tends to be about 15, maybe 20% in certain diets, but globally it's 15%. If you look at the Pure study or you look at theoretical evidence or whatever, you can get empirical and theoretical evidence that protein is pretty much 15% of any natural diet. So then the second you realize that when they set those dietary fat guidelines to have no more than 30% of your diet in the form of dietary fat, they have by definition set a minimum carbohydrate requirement of 55%. And it's really obvious because you look at that little pie and you draw your 15% and then you draw your 30% and then you've got 55% left. And that has to be carbohydrate. But it doesn't dawn on people that when they go low fat, they necessarily, inevitably go high carbohydrate. And then it also doesn't dawn on the low carb world that when they go low carb, they're going to have to go high fat. So you've got a lot of people who go low carb and then fear fat because they've come from a calorie counting background. So then they start trying to do unnatural things with protein, and that's just not healthy.
Let's talk about what happens when somebody follows the guidelines and they're having 50, 55% and beyond carbohydrates. Why is that problematic in the body?
Number one, because we don't need any carbohydrate. So you're making the major part of your diet the one macronutrient that we actually don't need. So just quickly in nutrition, the word essential means what it normally means, but in essential, the word nutrition, the word essential also means something that you must consume. The body doesn't make it. So I always like to give the example of cholesterol. Cholesterol is essential in the normal sense of the word, but it's not essential in the nutrition sense of the word because you don't have to consume it. The body will make it. But we have essential fats. We know those as omega-3, omega-6. We have essential amino acids. There's 8 or 9 that are essential. We must consume them. There are no essential carbohydrates whatsoever. None. Zilch, zippo. So telling people to have at least 55% of their diet in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't even need is the starting point that's wrong. Now I can go on from there and say another thing that is very wrong about that is because it's the one macronutrient that we don't need nutritionally, it's also the one macronutrient that we don't need in terms of fuel in the body. So I try to keep the math simple with an example here. So if you take a typical female who needs approximately 2,000 calories a day. Calories are, forget calories for weight. Calories are petrol. They're diesel for the car. So you need about 2,000 calories a day. As most people are aware, you've got a basal metabolic requirement, which is what you need if you're ill in bed all day. And that for that typical average woman would be about 1,500 calories a day. And then for that typical average woman, she would be needing about 500 calories on top to fuel moderate activity. Let's say she's moderately active about 3 times a week. Now, I've got a lovely little table in one of my presentations. So if you then look at those needs, so you've got the overall 2,000 calories, basal metabolic rate calories, and this is not controversial, are at about 1,500, and then it's about 500 for that exercise over and above. So the exercise over and above can be fueled primarily by fat or carbohydrate. The body would use protein, but only as a last resort. But the basal metabolic calories, and this is one of the things I haven't completely got to the bottom of, but the majority of those 1,500 are needed by the body in the form of fat and protein, because things like building bone density, fighting infection, muscle repair, cell repair, etc., needs fat and protein and those essential fats and those essential amino acids. So let's say you try to consume your entire 2,000 calories in the form of carbohydrate. The only way you could do that would be to eat sucrose. It's the only pure carbohydrate. But then you've not given the body, let's say, the 1,500 calories that it needed for basal metabolic repair, and you've given it way more than it could use up in the form of energy. So that, in a nutshell, is why, following the dietary guidelines, people are getting not only fatter, but they're also getting sicker, because they're eating the wrong thing to sustain good health, and they're eating too much carbohydrate, which is then stored as fat if it's not used up. And the amount that we're consuming as carbohydrate cannot physically be used up in the average person. If you are consuming, if that woman of 2,000 calories is consuming 1,100 calories a day in the form of carbohydrate, which is what the government is telling her to do, she probably only needed about 500 calories maximum in the form of carbohydrate, and that could happily have been provided by fat. So the other 600 calories, the body says, well, I'm not going to use these today. Anything not used up within a 24-hour period will get stored away as fat. And that's how people go into their family doctor and they say, oh, I really don't eat that much. And yet, here I am, I've gained a lot of weight. And the doctor says, oh, I just don't believe you. You can be eating less petrol than you actually need to fuel your vehicle, your body, and gaining weight because you're eating the wrong things.
You've touched on the weight gain piece a few times there, but let's take that even further and talk about spiking blood glucose, raising insulin, and then driving this extra energy into fat cells and causing all kinds of issues that way.
Yeah, so when you tell people at conferences, there are a few things that you say at a conference, and you're always looking for the audience reaction. And one of the ones that gets a sort of sit up, if not a bit of a gasp, is when you tell people you've got 1 teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream at any one time, 4 grams of glucose in the entire bloodstream, in 5 litres of blood or whatever. And they look really sort of quite taken aback. And then the body has got this incredible mechanism. You've got the pancreas releasing insulin to take glucose out of the bloodstream and glucagon to put glucose back into the bloodstream. So you've got this incredible mechanism, until we abuse it, that is keeping that blood glucose level at that sort of 4 grams per the entire body. So then you say to people, okay, so you have an apple. Now, an apple is partly glucose, partly fructose, slightly more fructose. Keep the maths simple again, 20 grams of apple, 20 grams of carbohydrate in a moderate apple. About 10 grams are going to be glucose, 10 grams are going to be fructose. The fructose is going to go to the liver. Hello, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the glucose is going to go into the bloodstream. And that's 10 grams of glucose that's gone into the bloodstream. So when you point that out to people, you think snacking on an apple is super healthy. You just put into the bloodstream 2.5 times the glucose that it wants in the entire bloodstream. And actually, it was quite happy. It was in balance. You might have felt like a snack, but it was in balance. It was quite happy. It's now got to get those 10 grams of glucose out of the bloodstream. And when you're a child or you're a younger person or you don't abuse your body with carbohydrates, the body will do that. It will do that quite effectively. But I think type 2 diabetes is the body saying, look, enough is enough. You ask me to take glucose out of breakfast, then you give me a snack in the middle of the morning, then you have another, low calorie, low fat, high carb lunch, then you do it again in the afternoon, then you do it again at dinner, then you do it again in the evening. And you've been doing that for years now, and I'm done. I'm out. I just can't keep getting that 4 grams back where it needs to be. And then if it doesn't keep it level, then you might dip down below the 4 grams. And that's when you do start craving food. I mean, this is one of the first things that I wrote about. My first book actually came out 20 years ago this year. And it was one of the conditions that I wrote about then that drive cravings. If you ever get to the point that your body doesn't keep that sort of stable 4 grams of glucose, you will get what people now describe as hangry, hunger and anger, irritability. The body will drive you to get some glucose back in. But of course, you need 1 gram, maybe. Maybe you've dipped down to about 3 something, you need 1 gram. And of course, people go and have a rice cake or an apple and they're back shooting in another 10 grams that they didn't need. So this whole carbohydrate intake thing is absolutely catastrophic for one of our most delicate mechanisms in the body.
And it's going to lead to weight gain and also fat blocking for people that want to start burning body fat. Every time they have carbs and spike the glucose, insulin follows. And then that puts us into a fat storage mode. And for most people these days, they want to lose the fat. So they're going to continuously, by snacking on these carbs throughout the day, block that fat burning system.
Yep, 100%. And I was at a conference last week and I'd done my talk, and it was to quite often these are the best talks to do actually, because I quite often talk at low carb conferences or talk at medic conferences or something like that. And you've got a lot of people in the audience who think they know something about nutrition, and they can be the most challenging audiences. So this was actually talking to 150 of the most senior police in the southwest of England. So they didn't know too much about nutrition. So they were just like sponges, like, wow, this is fascinating. Never really thought about food in that way. They were loving it. And so my talk was last, so it was just before we were going to have some free time before dinner. And somebody came up to me and said, so should I not be joining Slimming World then? And I said, okay, do you want to know how to lose weight in 10 minutes? And of course she said, yeah. And then a few others sort of gathered around and said, yeah, I want to hear it too. So I sort of grabbed a flip chart. And you go through the sort of, this is what you currently think. You think it's about energy in, energy out. What happens the minute you try to eat less? So they say, oh, you get hungry and you want to eat more. Right. Okay. And then are you able to do more? No, because you're too hungry because you didn't eat enough. Great. So you've got why calorie counting is really not a good idea. Do you understand physiologically the state that you need to be in to lose weight? Do you actually understand what weight loss is? Because it isn't just a calorie deficit. And they kind of look at you like, no, I've never thought about that. So you say, okay, so what is body fat? Triglyceride, triamine 3, you've got a glycerol backbone, you've got 3 fats essentially, and it can't get through the cell membrane. So it actually gets packaged with the help of insulin in the cell in that form, sort of on the other side. So the fat has got to get in there and the glucose has got to get in there. And of course, insulin does a marvelous job at doing that. So then you say to them, okay, if you want to lose weight, you want that fat out of the storage system. You want to start using that for energy, whether it's the glycerol backbone or the triglycerides or whatever, you want to use that for energy. Do you know what state you need to be in to be able to use that for energy? Forget calories. And they all kind of look at you like, no idea, not even thought about that. It's like, okay, so if your body can see any carbohydrate present, any stored carbohydrate, which is glycogen, they know that word because they do exercise, it's not going to call on fat. It's not going to call on any fat. It's not going to call on dietary fat or body fat because you've got another fuel source present. So the first thing you have to do is to not have that fuel present. And you explain to them about your glycogen storeroom, how much you've got to cut that back so that you're not filling it up to its capacity of about 1,400 calories per day. So, like, guys, you've got to whack your carbohydrate down as low as you can go and then halve it again and just keep going until you really can sustain it at, quite a reasonable level. Then your body is going to look for the next fuel source to fuel on, which is going to be fat. You're going to force it to do that. If you've just gone and eaten butter because you think that's how to do a keto diet, you're going to be fueling on your butter that you've just eaten. If you actually want to fuel on body fat, you've got to not have carbohydrate present and also don't start doing stupid things like adding fat to food. Just eat normally, massively cut your carbohydrate intake, and then probably at about 3-4 o'clock in the morning, the body is going to lose weight because it's going to need to tap into an alternative fuel source. But for as long as you're eating carbohydrates all day long, it is physiologically impossible, no matter how many calories you eat, for you to lose weight. If you're over what your body needs, in terms of fuel, which might be a paltry 800 calories a day. It might be that low. Eat them all in the form of carbohydrate, and you probably still ate more than you needed in the form of carbohydrate. And they got it so fast. It was unbelievable.
If you're enjoying this episode, let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much, and now back to the show. Let's get into specifics there. You mentioned 800 calories. Is that carbohydrates per day they would have to bring it down to, or what was that
Well, it's
number?
just, so if you go back to that woman on the 2,000 calories, as I say, I don't know exactly how much carbohydrate can be used for the basal metabolic rate. It's something I've had on my research list for ages. It's really not easy to find out. And if anyone's listening to this and they've got an idea, please get in touch. As a basic principle, it is largely fueled by fat and protein because it is building bone density, fighting infection, cell repair, and that stuff needs fat and protein. Now, if you're lying ill in bed all day and that's your basal metabolic rate requirement, you will also be keeping your body warm, and carbohydrates can provide energy, so they can keep the body warm. So there is an element of that 1,500. Now, even if I go really generous and say, right, let's assume of the 1,500 calories basal metabolic rate, 500 of those could be met by carbohydrate. That's probably quite high. There's still 1,000 that you need in the form of fat and protein. So if somebody goes on one of those stupid low-calorie milkshake diet drink kind of things, the Cambridge diet or whatever, they are largely carbohydrate because they can't have more than about 15% protein by law. They don't want to put fat in because it puts the calories up. So they are largely carbohydrate, and they're actually also largely sucrose, which is quite amusing. You're eating more than you probably needed for energy, which is back to that sort of 500 calories a day. So you really can get to quite a low calorie level, but if you're eating the wrong calories, you can still be gaining weight, but actually you'll also be getting sick at the same time because you're not eating the things that the body needs to repair itself and to build for the future.
For somebody that wants to get into that fat burning mode, in grams of carbs per day, how low would they bring that? Obviously a range.
I don't know. I'm not a counter. I'm not an advocate of counter. So your very first question, sort of, what is the one thing, the big first thing that people can do wrong? And I said, not eating real food. And another one, I could easily have given the answer, counting anything, having this bad relationship with food. I'm really not a fan of macros and wearing monitors and monitoring everything on a minute by minute basis. I don't think it's healthy. It gets really obsessive. It's not the relationship with food that I think is going to be healthy or helpful. So I would say don't do any of that. I mean, first thing, if you're following anywhere close to the US dietary guidelines or the UK dietary guidelines, you're going to be having around, 350 for a female, 400 grams for a male of carbohydrate a day, which is obscene. So the first thing I would say is cut out all your starchy carbohydrates. So, cut out all processed food. That's number one. That's a no-brainer. All processed food, just stop eating it. Cakes, biscuits, ice creams, donuts, cookies. Just stop it. It's disgusting. You're better than that. Don't do that to yourself. Then cut out your beige stuff. So you don't need rice, you don't need pasta, you don't need bread, you don't need potatoes. When you look at your plate and you've got meat or fish, eggs or dairy, which is your fat protein, and you've got some vegetables and salad if you like those, and if you're fine with those, I happen to like veg and salad quite a lot. I think it makes the plate look a bit nicer. The starchy stuff is then not bringing anything to the table. So if somebody said, if I've got a steak and a super salad on my plate and somebody said, do you want some potatoes or some brown rice? It's like, well, A, there's no room because I'm going to have a big portion of the meat. But B, why would I have that? What's it bringing to the table? It's bringing nothing nutritionally that I haven't already got on my plate. It's going to mess up my blood glucose level. In my diet principles that I said I first developed about 20 years ago, I developed this principle, which is really powerful in weight loss, just this alone, of realizing how nature provides food. So nature, again, this was a bit of a penny drop moment. They don't teach you this in school. Nature provides proteins in everything other than sucrose and oil. So nature provides carb proteins, which are the things that vegans would eat. So that's your whole grains, legumes, beans, pulses, vegetables, salads. They've got protein and they've got carbohydrate. They got a trace of fat, but that's a separate issue. And then nature provides predominantly fat proteins, which is the things that vegans don't eat. And that's your meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. When you realize that, you start thinking about what the fake food manufacturers do, because nature provides them separately. The minute the fake food manufacturers provide them together, we can't stop eating them. So think about all of that fake food. It's a combination, everything's got protein in it. It's a combination of fat and carbohydrate. So your ice cream, your cookies, your donuts, your cakes, all of it, crisps, chips, whatever you guys call them, all are a mix of fat and carbohydrate. And the body likes it, it wants more of it, it can't stop eating it. Now, the only comparable thing in real food that nature provides are nuts and seeds. And they've got good measures of fat, carbohydrate, and protein. I've never really known anyone overeat seeds. I mean, you might be able to. Nuts, definitely. I mean, stand somebody next to nuts at a party, and before they've realized they've just eaten the whole bowl, particularly if they're salted, that's another taste addition that you can put into the mix to make them irresistible and moreish, as I call them. But that's the only thing that's provided in nature. So I say to people who are trying to lose weight, nuts are not going to be your friend. So skip nuts because they're that fat carb combo. And then base your meals on the carb proteins or base your meals on the fat proteins, but don't mix. And there are several reasons for that. One is you'll just be able to eat way more. So if I say to you, right, you can have dry bread or dry oat cakes, or you can have cheese separately, you've got a limit on both of those options. The minute I say to you, you can have bread and cheese, you can have oat biscuits and cheese, or butter and oat biscuit, you've got no limit. That you're back into that fat carb combo. So first of all, it will limit what you eat. The secondly, it was what you raised earlier, which is the whole insulin fat storing ability. So if you had, for example, steak and potatoes, the body would want to use the carbohydrate for fuel, and it would want to store the fat for later on. And it can store the fat for later on because you ate carbohydrates, so you've got insulin present, so you've got the perfect fat storing environment. So if you didn't eat fat at that meal, if you had a baked potato with no butter or no cheese and maybe a veggie chili, so you've gone for that carb protein combination, you're just giving the body a lot of carbohydrate. And yes, the body's got to use it up. But if that's, say, your only carb meal for the day, and your other 2 meals are fat protein meals, then you're starting to restrict your carbohydrate. But processed food goes, starchy foods go. And then I don't think many people need to be more restrictive than that. It depends how metabolically, what's the word I could, compromise you are, metabolically unhealthy. If you can catch somebody young enough and just say to them, right, don't have all of those, but you can still have fluid dairy. Don't worry about putting grated carrot on your super salad, or, don't worry about your starchy vegetables as long as it's not potatoes. Enjoy berries if you're going to have yogurt with it and all that kind of thing. You'll probably be getting up to around 100 grams of carbohydrate a day, maybe towards that sort of moderate level, as Professor Tim Noakes would call it, around 130 grams of carbohydrate. Anywhere south of that, you're going to start doing pretty well. And then if you're not shifting the weight, or if you're finding that's creating cravings, perhaps because you are a little bit metabolically unhealthy, then cut back. Then maybe have a look at what you're eating on a daily basis, because we eat the same things most days, and say, okay, what could I cut out quite easily? Let's say I have an orange for breakfast or something, or I have a piece of fruit late afternoon because dinner's going to be late. Let's say that's the person's diary. Right, cut that out. That's 20 grams of carbohydrate gone straight away. You can still have your latte, your cappuccino, your Greek yogurt, your berries, your super salad. You're not going to feel deprived, but just cut out the big ticket items until you get to the point where you're not craving, you're feeling good, you've got energy all day long, and your weight is heading to where you want it to be.
For somebody who's going to start to adopt what we're talking about here, cutting back on carbs, say they're in that range you talked about earlier, 300-400 grams per day, how do you recommend they do this? Because, like anything in life, there's ripping off the Band-Aid or doing it slowly to allow their metabolism to adjust and to form new habits. Do you find it's better for somebody to do this more slowly over time?
There's debate on this, isn't there? I mean, the work that, is it Philip Prinz has been doing with Prof Noakes, Jeff Volek, Steve Finney, they've been looking in athletes, which is obviously a different person to a metabolically challenged person, but they've been looking at athletes as if they're carb fueling currently, how quickly then can they switch to fat fueling, and do they lose performance in the interim? And certainly the most recent work from Philip Prinz has been extraordinary, and they're not losing performance even in that short period of time. Now, in my experience, working more with metabolically challenged people and people who've got quite a lot of weight to lose, they do go through a period when the body's lazy. It's used to fueling on carbohydrates. It's been getting more than enough carbohydrate all day long to fuel the requirements. What they tend to do as well is, because they're in this sort of hyperglycemic highs and lows, because the body isn't keeping that 4 grams of glucose. I mean, how can it when you're chucking in 400 grams of carbohydrate on a daily basis? How can it even do that? So they are finding that they're lurching from a high to a low. They get a bit tired. They grab some M&Ms or something, and then they have a sugar crash, and then they grab some more. So they're just in this roller coaster all day long. So it would be what I just said, which is number one, ditch the processed food. That's just got to go, and that's not gently, slowly. Just get rid of it. Just stop it. Yes, it's going to hurt. Yes, you're going to have food cravings, which is why I address sort of why we have food cravings in a lot of the writings that I've done. But you've just got to say it's going. I'm not having processed food anymore. Then, as I say, cut out the starches, so start getting more down to that figure. Some people do go pretty brutal. It's almost as if they're going to say, right, I'm just going to force the body to fuel in a different way, and they will hear about keto or see a presentation or go to a conference or something, and they just think, just going to try it. And they do tend to go through, some people call it keto flu, people call it sort of keto tiredness. The body is going to rebel. I mean, the body's going to say, well, I used to get M&Ms every time I was feeling a bit low in energy. You just went and, replenished the sugar, literally the sucrose. What's going on now? But it doesn't take too long. I really don't think. I mean, is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? In the course of the rest of your life, it's not a long period of time. And yes, this does need to be for the rest of your life, which is why, I don't want people counting things thinking, oh, I'm going to be carnivore for the rest of my life. I'm never going to be able to eat a crunchy salad ever again. I'm not going to be able to have a latte, go out for coffee with my friends, all that. I don't want people to feel deprived in that way. Everyone is going to have something that works for them, and it doesn't mean we've all got to be Sean Baker or whatever. That works for Sean Baker. It doesn't work for everyone else. So just, I'd say, head in that right direction and keep evaluating how you feel. If you want to take the plunge and jump in right at the deep end, then go 50 grams of carbohydrate if you want. Don't do it when you've got an important event coming up, except that you're going to feel rubbish for a period of time. But it's going to force the body into fueling in a different way. And having, my husband and I went through this, many, many, many years ago. And I can remember on a walk, he would sometimes feel quite sort of lightheaded in the early days. It's like, whoa, okay, body was looking for glucose then. And it would be seconds. He'd just stand and pause. And it's almost as if the body says, right, break something down, chuck it back into the bloodstream. And then he's off again. It's seamless. But it will feel different, particularly if you've never done it. I mean, a lot of people have tried an Atkins and then given up or something. But if you've never even tried to go low in carbohydrate, you're going to shock the body. But I don't think that's a bad thing. You just need to power through it.
For somebody who is making that transition, how do you feel about bringing, say, exogenous ketones, MCT oil, electrolytes, different supplements and adjuncts into the diet to support that transition and beyond?
I've never done it. I've never looked at it. I've never reviewed the evidence. So I can't comment on, is it helpful? Is it efficacious? I just don't know. I mean, obviously the ideal, if you want to get into the state of ketosis, and I test every now and again out of curiosity, mostly. There's a particular friend who's always testing herself. She's fascinated by it. So if I ever go up and see her, she'll always test me just before dinner. And she's like, oh, I can't believe it. You're always in ketosis. And I actually eat quite a lot of carbohydrate. She'll say, what have you had today? And I say, oh, I don't know, chocolate mousse, Greek yogurt, berries. I had a chocolate on the way up because I found one in the car. And like, sure, you're still in ketosis. So you can be, and I do know there've been times in my life when the Tim Noakes trial, for example. I do remember it was just so stressful. I mean, anything you were eating was just getting burned off immediately. My appetite was not there because I didn't know when I was going to get called to the stand. So you just sort of had butterflies in your tummy the whole time. And I know then I was in ketosis for quite a few days. And it's quite interesting. And you realize what your friends are saying who kind of live in that state all the time. They say you just feel you're fueling on rocket fuel. You don't feel hungry. You really can go hours without eating. You just don't feel hungry. It is quite a nice state to be in. And then you say, well, why are you not in that all the time? Because I enjoy having a latte with my friends. I enjoy dinner parties. If I go out for dinner with someone, they know how we eat largely, but whatever they put in front of me, I'm going to eat. I'm not going to be rude and say, oh, you've given me cauliflower rice here. I'm not sure I even want 10 grams of carbohydrate. Just enjoy it. Not I'm not that fussy about food at all.
Hearing you talk there, it sounds like you're not concerned, definitely for yourself, about being in ketosis, but for people you're working with or people listening today, do you feel getting into that metabolic state periodically has certain advantages and is something we should aim for?
Oh yeah. And that's me, I've got to put it in the caveat of I'm almost certainly in ketosis at some point every day. But because I'm not losing weight, my weight has been stable for absolutely ages. I mean, 20 plus years. Clearly there's times when I'm using body fat for fuel, and then there's times when I'm storing again. And I actually think that's pretty healthy. I think if you've got my husband's an engineer, and he always says if you've got a mechanism that works both ways, it's probably useful to use it both ways. It's designed to work both ways. We are designed to be able to store fat and unstore fat. And the dietary guidelines just put us in permanent store fat mode. And then you've got people who are sort of fasting, who I guess are trying to get into a sort of permanent unstore mode. And that's fine if you're 300 pounds, but it's not fine if you're 107 pounds or whatever I am. We talk in stone and whatever over here. So, but no, I do think it's a good state to be in. And I think if you get your carbohydrate down to the kind of level that you need to be healthy, to avoid type 2 diabetes, to avoid non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, to make sure that you've got enough room for fat and protein in your diet and the most nutritious foods, if you're doing all of those right things, at some point in the day, you are naturally going to be in ketosis. And if you've got a lot of weight to lose and you get into that state, it really can help you, because you really genuinely will find I'm not physically hungry. You then might still have all the psychological reasons for eating, because a lot of people didn't get to 300 pounds because they were eating the way that the government told them to eat. They got caught up in the whole carbohydrate is addictive. You want the same thing, you want more of it. If you get to the point you start to feel bad if you don't have it. And that's food addiction. You're then into that kind of state. So there might be all of those kind of things still going on, and you've got to address those separately. But you will actually be able to take away your physical food cravings, which a lot of people at the moment would struggle to believe that they could do that. But you can do that. You don't need a Zempic to do that. You can do that through turbo fueling.
You quickly touched on fasting there, and it sounds like it's not a tool you're a big fan of unless you're grossly overweight. Is that include intermittent fasting, or are you just talking about longer fasts?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of longer fasts, I guess, because I work a lot in the world of women. I mean, we do have men in our club, but we have a lot of women in the club. And my experience has been that women over time, at some point in their life, if not for most of their adult life or teenage life, have had a bad relationship with food. And fasting for them is the sort of yin and yang of eating disorder behavior that they have had at some point. So it might be overeating, and then you cut back the next day to compensate. I did it. I mean, why am I saying they? I can say. I did this as a teenager. If I ate too much one day, I would try to eat less the next day, doing that through college as well. So this whole sort of, I'm not going to eat for a couple of days. it's got connotations with a lot of people. It feels like a punishment. It feels, oh, you overindulge, you greedy pig kind of thing. You've got to cut back, and get sort of, beat yourself up. It's not a good, it doesn't have good associations for a lot of people, particularly women, and definitely anyone who's had an eating disorder. So I also think it gets the body into a bit of a starvation mode. So I actually think you can achieve similar results to fasting on a ketogenic intake, but you're not starving the body. So you're still giving the body the fat and protein that it wants for all those basal metabolic requirements. You're just not giving it the carbohydrate on top that it didn't need for energy, because actually you want to force it to use body fat for energy. So you can still eat a decent amount and say, I kind of view it as you've got those basal metabolic rate calories for free. The body wants those. It wants those to do all of its activities. And actually, if you don't eat those, the body is probably going to switch off some of those activities. So, what happens when women have an eating disorder? The first thing that goes is the reproductive system. Your periods just stop. It turns off the heating system. You get cold. If you're anorexic, you get a sort of fine body hair that grows over. That's your body's way of compensating to keep you warm, because it's turned off the heating system. The lymphatic drainage system is not so good. So you get this sort of puffy carb face, even though you're not actually eating very much. Turns off the skeletal system. You're not going to be building bone density if you're a teenage anorexic. You're not going to be repairing cells or doing body weight. The body just, this idea that you just cut back by a certain number of calories and the body goes, oh, there you go, I'm a cash machine for fat. You wanted to lose some weight. There it is, exactly 500 calories. That was the deficit you created. Body doesn't. It just turns off the systems to the tune of 500 calories. So I think give your body what it needs to keep it healthy, and then really watch how much, particularly carbohydrate, you're giving it on top of that, but also don't go mad on fat. So no, not a fan of fasting for even a day, a 24-hour period. What I am a fan of is the overnight fast. So ideally, we should be finishing dinner as early as possible, and having breakfast or whatever your first meal of the day is as late as possible. So the evenings we're not out socializing. Like tonight, I've got this. So I finished eating by about 5 o'clock my time. And the next time I'll eat will probably be 6 or 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. It depends what time I wake up. And I've had a 13-hour fast. I've cleaned my teeth already. That's it. I'm not eating until tomorrow morning. And that really can help dieters. I mean, it can help in so many different ways. One is it just gives the digestive system a rest. This whole putting glucose in, dealing with fat, dealing with protein, it is too much to ask the body to do it too often. Give it a good break overnight as many times as you can. The other really powerful thing for people trying to lose weight is, when do they most likely go off the rails? In the evening. So finish your dinner by 5:30, get in the habit, clean your teeth, not eating again until breakfast, and just get in that habit. Don't question it. I won't end this and go, oh, I wonder if I fancy something to eat. It just won't occur to me because I've had my last meal until tomorrow morning. It won't enter my head. And that's how you want to be if you're trying to manage your intake. You don't want that voice in your head going, oh, do you fancy some potato chips? Do you think there's any in the cupboard? Don't let it take hold. Just shut off the debate. You're finished for the day. You eat again tomorrow. And you then don't have all the bad things that you eat in the evening.
Today's a bit of an atypical day with this interview in the evening for you. But on a typical day, when will you cut off your eating at night? When will you typically finish dinner?
This was typical, actually. So, I mean, if you'd have said 4 to 6 my time, I'd have said really ideally not, because that's when I would prefer to have my meal. I don't want to wait until 7 o'clock, ideally, to have it. I mean, obviously I can be flexible, but it didn't seem to matter in terms of, is it 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 for you? So 6 to 8 is better for me. If I'm out socializing, I mean, a lot of our friends now have got into this whole early supper thing. So when they come to us, they come for early supper. So they will, we don't necessarily have it at 4:30, which is what Andy and I would have almost every day. We'll have our main meal at 4:30. But if they're coming round, they're coming round for supper at sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock. Whereas dinner parties tend to be sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock. But you get a lot of feedback from people saying, actually, do you know what? I quite like it. Because you can then have a really nice sort of 6, 7 hour dinner party and you're still on the right side of midnight. Whereas you start having your meal at 8 o'clock. I mean, we did have one on Saturday night that was a 8 o'clock start. And of course, we're still eating cheese at 2 o'clock in the morning and seeing where the next bottle of wine is coming from. But people enjoy the early supper when they get into it. Try it. Clearly, you get home from work, it's more difficult, but nothing's impossible. We can do things that help our patterns if we put our minds to it.
Talk about breaking the fast in the morning. It sounds like you do that quickly after you get up. Talk about what that meal would be and what are the other meals and the spacing throughout the day.
Okay, I do like to eat breakfast. There are people who don't like to eat breakfast. I've always enjoyed breakfast. It's in many ways it's my favourite meal of the day. What we used to do when we had a rescue dog, she sadly passed a couple of years ago. But the first thing you need to do when you get downstairs is walk her, because she needs to go out and have a comfort break. But we take her on a pretty decent walk, particularly when she was younger. So it'd be 45 minutes, come back, and then have breakfast. Because we don't have her now, we do it the other way around. So we go downstairs. Hubby has might be leftovers from the night before, bacon and eggs. He's very much the natural carnivore. I'm not. You might have realised in your research that I was veggie for 20 years. So I find it particularly difficult to eat meat in the morning. I could have scrambled eggs and smoked salmon. I would enjoy that, or just scrambled eggs or an omelette. That's fine. But far more likely, I'll have a big portion of full fat Greek yogurt with some berries. I try to pick the berries in the autumn, put them in the freezer, and then eke them out over the year. I might have a piece of fruit. I quite like oranges, or if something's in season, the apples from the garden. We have fig tree if they're in season. I'll have those. And then I like milk. I like dairy. So I have a sort of cappuccino or latte, whatever, that's bigger than me. I mean, it's probably, I don't know, like 3/4 of a pint of milk or something. So there's a lot of dairy. Then when COVID hit, we don't have to go into that, but Andy and I were not impressed with this whole lockdown thing. It's like the world has gone mad. So we decided we had to do something that was going to be nice, because we were only supposed to be 3 weeks, remember, to flatten the curve. And I've got a really good chocolate mousse, which is melted dark chocolate, a dash of vanilla, dash of rum, dash of coffee, eggs, cream, basically. So I said, sod it, I'm doing my chocolate mousse. So then we have chocolate mousse now when we get back from the walk. So that is going to come up to 4 occasions of eating. Lunch is just whatever's around. Might be an omelette, might be eggs, it might be leftovers, bowl of chili. And then the main meal is in the evening. And that's a big bit of red meat or oily fish. Andy's always red meat. He's not a fish man. We do like veg, we grow salad. So we'll have a really attractive super salad or some stir fry veg. Cheese, I've got great local farm that delivers cheese to the door. That's dairy again. I love my dairy. And then we might have more yogurt, chocolate mousse. It depends. Cream and berries or something, just if we're still hungry. But we're usually not. But because of all the fat that's in throughout that, most of my fat is coming from dairy, cheese, cream, milk, full fat yogurt. And I guess most of Andy's energy is coming from meat. He's a real lamb, steak, bacon, eggs. He could easily be carnivore, but I couldn't.
And do you find with other people the dairy is accepted and not an issue? Because in the health world, you often hear that dairy is controversial and a lot of people are reacting to it. Do you think that's true, or are you an anomaly?
No. So on my website, zoeharcombe.com, I think it's open view. If not, I can put it on open view and put it in the show notes or whatever. But I've got an article on dairy, sort of to eat it or not to eat it. And I did some research into this. This is over 10 years ago now. It's very ethnically diverse. So the chance of a white Northern European being dairy intolerant is actually really low. It's about 1 in 20. The chance of a person of Asian origin, even if they're born in the UK, if they've got Asian ethnicity, the chance of them being dairy intolerant is the other way around. It's 19 out of 20. So if we've got people in the club saying, oh, I'm not sure I'm able to tolerate dairy, it's a really simple first rule of thumb. Do you look like me, or do you look like Rishi Sunak or whatever? Because if you look like Rishi Sunak, chances are you have got dairy intolerance. If you look like me, chances are you don't. Um, and I don't want people cutting out too many real foods unless they have to. Um, so again, it's part of this whole obsessive thing that can go on in our world of, oh, I'm only going to eat grass-fed meat. Well, that's great, and I do, but then I can afford to, and I live in the countryside, and I know my local farmer, so that's easy for me to do. It's not so easy in New York or London, and I do accept that. The dairy industry over here is very different to the dairy industry over in the US. I mean, the cows are grazing in the field. The windows are closed now because it's dark, but I could see them if the windows were open. I know where the farm is. I can go and see the milk coming out of the cows if I so choose before it lands up on my doorstep. You know, we have a whole different relationship with food here in Wales, let alone in the UK. And dairy just has so many nutrients. I mean, you get the whole vegan argument, don't you, of, oh, you're eating, you know, the baby milk that should have gone to the calf kind of thing. It's like, so how come it's got just about everything I need other than vitamin C? You know, it's got all my B vitamins, it's got calcium, it's got phosphorus, it's got vitamin D, it's got my bone nutrients, it's got essential fats, not as much as oily fish, but it's got essential fats, it's got my complete protein. How come it's got all of that if I'm really not supposed to be eating it? And I'm just kind of, I like it. I feel good eating it. It doesn't cause me any problems. You'll know if it does. You'll get bloating, or you'll get cravings for it, or you'll find that you can't lose weight if you're having dairy. But I like it.
I wonder for people that have stayed away because of things they've heard and then they're transitioning back. You mentioned bloating. I wonder if there's a period of transition that people need to ease into it or be weary that their body is adjusting as they're bringing that back in.
There might be. I mean, the other thing that dairy does as well, particularly things like natural yogurt with lactobacillus and acidophilus and all those good sort of gut thing. I'm sure we'll get onto fiber at some point, but when people say, oh, you need fiber for your gut microbiome, no, you don't. You just need dairy products. You know, there's lots of other things that will help, but in terms of food, you know, blue cheese or fermented foods, they don't need to have any carbohydrate in them at all. You know, pickled herrings or whatever are fermented. The natural yogurts, kefir, you know, no fiber in kefir, but that will give you if you want a colonic irrigation, if you've never tried kefir, do kefir for about 24, 48 hours. And as it's repopulating your gut with the good flora, it's also getting rid of the bad flora at the same time. And you will literally have a flushing through of your body. So yeah, you might experience something, but I'd say again, don't get put off with that. There's some things that are going to make you bloat because, quite frankly, they're bad for you, like wheat. If wheat isn't making you bloat, then you're lucky or unlucky, because actually the sooner it makes you bloat, the better, because you'll give it up, and you're just better off without it. But dairy shouldn't make you bloat. It shouldn't.
You talked about the quality of the dairy in your neck of the woods. How do you feel about our dairy here in North America? Because in the health world, again, coming back to the controversy, there's a lot of nuance there where people, and I'm no expert in this area, but there's A1, A2 dairy, people that can tolerate sheep and goat.
Mhm.
If we're over here in North America, do those nuances become more important given our quality differences?
I don't know. I mean, my understanding of the dairy industry in America is it's probably more also things like antibiotics given to animals. There's tighter legislation over in Europe. And even though the UK is not part of Europe anymore, it's been in Europe for over 30 years. So the legislation is sort of embedded in our legislation. So our understanding is we just don't have the level of hormones, antibiotics, and so on in the animals or in the dairy products. So it's far less of a problem. And if we're getting Greek yogurt, we're getting it from Greece because it's not so far away. And it gets strained through cloths or whatever. So, it's produced in some really natural ways. I don't know what it's like in the US. I imagine the dairy requirement is quite enormous because you were the guys that invented the milky coffee. Which appalls Europeans because, of course, the French and the Italians, if the coffee's bigger than that, then you're doing something wrong. When you walk in and go, I want an Americano, that's bad enough. When you want that sort of coffee flavored milk, you'll find most French and Italians are just like, who's just walked in? But you must get through a shed load of milk, which means you've got to have cows in not great conditions. And we see them in the pictures. They're in concreted floor sheds where they're not out grazing the land, which is not good for the environment. It's not good for them. It's not good for you. It's not good for the food. I mean, for me, that's where I go back to really empathizing with vegans. That's not how the food chain should work. And over in the US, if I didn't know where my milk was coming from, I'd go to the Western Price Foundation, get their booklet and say, right, where's my nearest raw milk producer? I need to get me some of that and stock it up in the freezer. Failing that, I would not be going in and getting a Starbucks, not knowing where it comes from on a regular basis.
You brought up fiber. Let's get into that now. And this ties back to what we were talking about before, cutting down on carbs, which naturally are going to have more fiber in them.
Only carbs.
Actually, they're going to be our only source of fiber because animal products don't contain fiber.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what happens when we start to cut that back.
In most people, good things. I mean, this is amazing. When I speak at conferences, the trigger topics are fiber and cholesterol. And for the police last week, the first question was on fiber. And I did another talk to some medics in January, and the first question was on fiber. Fair play to Kellogg's and the cereal companies and the dietitians and all the rest of it. They have done a splendid job on the fiber propaganda, because the idea that we need fiber is really ingrained, in people's minds. So, I mean, just go back to the basics. We went through the macronutrients. There are essential proteins, there are essential fats, there are no essential carbohydrates. Fiber is a subset of carbohydrate. Fiber is only found in carbohydrates. If there are no essential carbohydrates, there is no need for fiber. You could just end there and say, right, that's it, end of debate. You do not need fiber. But it is right to ask the question, okay, you don't need it, but is it good for you? You don't need laughter, but it sure as hell is good for you. Is it good for you? No, I don't think it is. It's waste. In what other field is waste considered good for us? If you're generating more household waste than usual, somebody wouldn't be going out and telling you, oh, generate even more. The more household waste you can produce, the better. It makes no sense in terms of what carbohydrates are. If you sort of, the carbohydrate 101, you've got single sugars, monosaccharides, that's your glucose, fructose, and galactose. You've got the disaccharides. That's when you get into things like sucrose, which is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose. When you get down into the polysaccharides, poly means many, saccharides means sugar. So you're into many sugars. How is many sugars good for you? And of course, the indigestible version of many sugars is what fiber is. So the technical definition of fiber is indigestible many sugars. How is that good for you? How is that good for you? And then, so the arguments I get back when people have raised that question, they say, oh, because if you don't have fiber, you won't go to the toilet as much. It's like, no, you're going to the toilet because you've put waste in. Fiber is the waste that needs to come out in the toilet. Don't put the waste in. You've got less waste to come out going down the toilet. Do you really think it was going to be a good idea for caveman to produce the kind of waste that we're producing today if you're following the 30 grams of fiber a day? I mean, you'd attract every wild animal in the region because people will be going outside the cave every 5 minutes to go and have a poop or whatever. I mean, it's insane. This whole idea that if you don't put it in, you won't be able to go. So if your sink is blocked with fat, what are you going to do? Put more fat down the sink? No, you're going to flush it through with water. So if you're feeling constipated, drink more water, but don't put more stuff in. People think, oh, I'm a bit constipated, I'll have a bowl of all bran. And you put even more in. So you've got even more then that's going to come out. So you're going to feel even more uncomfortable and even more bloated. So their final argument is, oh, I need it for my gut flora. It's like, no, you don't. There's a lot of things that make for a good gut flora that admittedly you didn't have any say in. But we've got to be honest because these are facts. If you want great gut flora, you should have healthy parents. You didn't get a choice in that, but you should. You should have natural childbirth. You needed to be bathed in your mother's microflora as you were coming out. You didn't get a choice in that. You needed to be breastfed for as long as possible. That's a bit controversial nowadays, apparently. Sorry, that's a fact as well. Don't then take antibiotics as a child unless your life depends on it. If you do, take probiotics at the same time. Same as an adult, quite frankly. You don't take antibiotics because you think you might get an ear infection. You wait until you really have got an ear infection and then see if you need antibiotics. And then always take probiotics, which would be a really good quality kefir alongside. And then the other things that feed the gut flora we've mentioned earlier: kefir, lactobacillus, natural live yogurt, probiotics, fermented food. That you need a bowl of cereal or you need some beans on a piece of whole grain toast. That's BS from the fake food industry who want you to buy cereal and baked beans on toast. It's complete nonsense.
So just to be clear here, you mentioned a number of things that early on are going to impact the microbiome, things from the mother passing through the birth canal and breastfeeding and avoiding antibiotics. When we're adults, it sounds like from what you shared there, fermented foods is the only route of repopulating and maintaining that. Or am I missing something there?
Yeah, no, I mean it's fermented food, it's the dairy products, it's the blue cheese, the natural yogurts, lactobacillus, all that kind of thing. But it's also not taking antibiotics as an adult unless your life depends on it. And if you do, take a fantastic bout of kefir at the same time. So I had an operation 12 years ago or something. I was unfortunate in getting a post-op infection. I needed antibiotics. I mean, there was absolutely no question. It was a life-threatening situation. I got some goat's kefir. I know the person who makes some goat's kefir in the UK. It is the absolute puts nuts of kefir. It is so strong. It is so powerful. Tastes absolutely disgusting. So it's doing some good. And I took that all the time that I was taking the antibiotics and then took it for a few weeks afterwards. And I didn't notice any problems. And one of the other things that I write about in my diet books, I mean, again, 20 years ago, I was one of the first writing about lactobacillus and gut flora and your gut microbiome, and particularly talking about yeast syndrome, yeast infections, something called Candida albicans, which is the sort of the bad flora that can proliferate if you're eating a lot of sugar, a lot of flour, a lot of processed food, and not balancing it with the good gut flora. And that drives cravings. So one of the ways that you'll know if you are out of balance is you'll be getting cravings for sometimes some quite strange foods. So, and there's some brilliant books on this. You look at things like, who was it? Leon Chatow, Is Yeast Your Problem? Trowbridge and Walker. I mean, these books now are 50 years old. I was reading books back from the 1950s on food intolerance that it was almost like nobody had read them for 40 years. And then suddenly I was discovering them in bookshops in London or America or something. Some incredibly powerful stuff has been written about food cravings and our relationship with food. And getting our gut flora out of balance is absolutely something else that drives cravings. So particularly if people find themselves craving pickled foods, suspect that you've got a Candida albicans overgrowth. And if you look at the broad range of symptoms that can accompany that, I've had people contact me saying, oh my goodness, just learning about that. I went through that questionnaire. Everything was explained from fatigue, brain fog, cravings, inability to concentrate, poor sleep. The gut is the second brain of the body. If that is out of balance, it's affecting everything else in terms of our health.
When you've brought up probiotics a couple of times, you've mentioned kefir.
Oh,
How do you
kefir,
feel
is that how
about the
you pronounce it?
capsules? That's how I say it, at
Okay.
least. How do you feel about the capsules, the powders, supplements of probiotics? Any value there?
That again, I haven't tried. I imagine there is some benefit. I mean, I think if you're taking antibiotics, do anything probiotic. Just anything is going to be better than nothing. And I remember when my family doctor prescribed me. I ended up in the hospital back where I'd had the operation to get the first sort of right, what antibiotic are we going to give you? Because we're in a serious situation here. And then when they got it right, I just had to go and see the family doctor to get sort of the repeat prescription. And I went to the family doctor and I said, you're writing out a prescription for antibiotics. Please, can you put some probiotics on there? And he kind of looked at me and went, yeah, sure. Good idea. It's just like, well, why don't you do that all the time? Why don't you think of that? You're the doctor here. Antibiotics, probiotics, just put the two together. So yeah, I'm sure tablets are good, capsules are good. There's something about kefir, as I call it, that it's just because it's not a capsule that goes down into the stomach and then the stomach is going to break it down and then it explodes in there. And it's going down the whole digestive tract. So it's going to have an impact in the mouth. And some people can actually get candida in the mouth. So in fact, it's very common. If you ever see somebody with a white coating on their tongue, or some people will find they get sort of a white deposit somewhere in the mouth or back towards the tonsils, that's a candida deposit. Get a probiotic course, PDQ, massively cut back on the sugar in your diet, and that includes fruit sugar, and get that gut flora back under control, and you'll feel so much better.
So in the supplement realm, so far we've talked about probiotic capsules. We've talked about, I brought up
Ketones.
electrolytes, ketones, MCT oil before. For somebody that's eating the way we've been talking about today, do you feel there's an additional role for supplements on top of that?
Yeah, some supplements. So I'm a big fan of vitamin D, really big fan of vitamin D. And to get it at the level that is best for optimal health, I mean, for somebody of my size, I think you should be going minimum 2,000 international units on a daily basis. For someone my husband's size, he's 6 foot, and again, we do it in stone. He's like 14 stone. That's probably nearly 200 pounds. He's a ex-rugby player. I mean, you've seen him. He's not carrying weight, but he's solid. He's on 5,000 IU a day. And my brother, who's got cancer, he's on 10,000 IU a day. So I just think it's an absolutely magical supplement. If you're going to take vitamin D, and of course it should be D3, then you should take K2 with it. And that can be either 100 mcg or 200 mcg, anywhere in between. It's just something that makes sure that the calcium deposits are not collating in the arteries, but they're sort of going into the bones, which is where you want them, because it's a bone nutrient as well as a immune system and health optimization nutrient. What else would I take? Well, we do take omega-3 capsules. Particularly my husband needs those because he's just not a big fan of fish. He doesn't see fish as, if he has fish for a dinner, he doesn't feel like he's had a dinner. He needs steak or lamb or pork or some red meat of some kind, whereas I could happily have tuna or salmon and a big portion and feel quite happy I've had a decent meal. So we take omega-3 supplements on top. Very few people are eating enough oily fish to get enough omega-3 at levels that are going to be optimal for health. That'd be about it, actually. I'm not a sort of sit down to breakfast and take 50 pills kind of person, but D3, K2, omega-3, that would do me.
I want to tie in some of what we've been talking about to the carnivore diet. And you mentioned the fact that seafood is important, and you actually take an omega-3 supplement to make sure you're getting those omega-3 oils. We talked about before fermented dairy and helping the microbiome with that. For somebody who's on a more simple red meat carnivore diet, how do you feel about that in general? And then tying it to those couple of areas I just brought up.
Yeah. Um, I mean, we had a study recently that Sean Baker was involved in, and it was one of the ones I looked at for my regular note. And it was an interesting study. It wasn't a randomized controlled trial. It was I guess you call it a case control study. So they advertised to find a large number of people, I mean, several hundred, who were doing a carnivore diet, and then asked them lots of things about their health, And what they were therefore able to say was, when we look at this population of people doing a carnivore diet, and particularly ask them questions about how they feel now relative to how they used to eat, it was really good evidence for the carnivore diet. I mean, people, and you would expect that, because if you're going to try the carnivore diet and then stick with it, you'll get in some health benefits. You're not going to do it for fun, because it's unsociable. It's cuts you out of doing sort of everyday things. So they would obviously be getting some benefits. Now, we don't know what that's going to do long term. What we do know is that all the things that the dietitians think are going to happen short term don't happen. So the obvious one is, people will say, oh, you can't get vitamin C, so you're going to get scurvy, but they don't get scurvy. And not many people know you can actually get vitamin C in meat. Liver, for example, has more vitamin C than an apple per 100 grams. I always find that quite amusing. You can get vitamin C in the thymus gland or whatever. These guys are not necessarily eating nose to tail. A lot of them are just eating the organ meats, but they're not getting scurvy. So it's actually telling us something about our requirement for vitamin C. And because I think it's vitamin B3 alongside vitamin C are used in the metabolism of carbohydrate, there is definitely an argument that if you're not metabolizing carbohydrate, your requirement for those two nutrients is going to go down. And it would appear in vitamin C, it kind of disappears, in that they are just not consuming plant foods and yet not getting scurvy. So the early signs are certainly good. It makes sense in terms of evolution, in that during the Ice Age, which was only about 10,000 years ago and apparently lasted for about 30,000 years, we didn't get vegetation. And that does appear to be the period when we evolved from sort of Neanderthal to literally rocket scientists. So that it was obviously fueling our brain in some way. So there's a strong argument that get enough animal foods, enough fat, protein, the brain development is going to be very, very good. Do we know how people are going to do on a pure animal diet over a long period of time? Yeah, we probably do, because we've got the Inuit, we've got Maasai, we've got tribes who've been around for a long period of time. They're now eating more in the way that we do eat, and they're going to suffer for that. But we've been able to observe them over a long enough period of time to say, hey, do you know what? If you only get access to seal and whale, and you are the Inuit, then you're going to be okay. And so I think you do all right. I think people like Sean Baker, quite a lot of them do eat fish. So I'm sure I've seen Sean eat salmon, if not smoked salmon. I think carnivore to them doesn't just mean meat, or it doesn't just mean steaks. It means no plant food. It means animal foods. It doesn't mean fluid dairy. They don't do that. Some of them do hard cheese, which is practically zero carb. A lot of them do eggs. Most of them do eggs. And a lot of them will be doing fish. So do they get enough in the form of omega-3? I don't know. Maybe time will tell on that one. Maybe the Inuit were doing well because they were eating fish and seal and whale and so on, as opposed to cows and sheep and whatever else. But whatever we know at this stage, you can say one thing with absolute certainty: is healthier than the standard American diet. So that's not the one you want to be worrying about. It's the one that you're telling 350 million people to follow. That's the one that you really want to be worrying about.
You brought up liver there when you were talking about vitamin C. How do you feel about organs as a whole? Are they something that you intersperse within your daily diet? Now there's different supplements you can get, so you can get them in capsule form, which makes it easier. How do you look at those as part of a healthy diet?
Yeah, me, no. And that's probably part of the vegetarian heritage. I don't like the taste. I find it too strong. My hubby is a really good chef. I mean, he'll make a liver pate using cream and mixing all stuff up, and people absolutely love it. We serve it at a dinner and they're dipping in with the celery sticks and it's gone in minutes, but I can't even take that. It's too strong. My hubby lived in France for 3 years. He's just completely used to eating any bit of any animal you put in front of him: frog's legs, snails, horse. I hate to say it. He'll eat anything: kidneys, liver, spleen, anything. And I think it is healthier because we are supposed to eat the whole sort of nose to tail. It's better for the animal as well. It's more respectful to the animal. That stuff doesn't get thrown away. The butcher sells it off cheaper, But if everybody ate in the way that sort of some of the carnivores do and just the organ meat, that wouldn't work well for the butchers at all, because they have got to get rid of the other cuts of the meat and the organs and all the bits for the whole animal. Otherwise, it's a waste.
You've mentioned a couple times now this period of your life where you went plant-based. How far back does that go?
Yeah, so
And what type of plant-based are we talking? Vegan, vegetarian? And then what brought you out of it?
yeah, so it started off, I mean, I guess like a lot of young females or whatever, you get to sort of late teens, early 20s. It's an animal thing. I'm a massive animal lover. And I just thought, oh, I don't want to be eating animals. I mean, I was really ignorant then in terms of the role that ruminants play in the whole sort of ecosystem. So it was just this kind of, I don't want to be eating animals. You know, what anyone else does is up to them. I wasn't one of those sort of militant veggies. And I just found sort of more and more through college, we call it college. I went to Cambridge University and they have different colleges. More and more through college, it's kind of like, I don't want to eat animals. And you're quite poor as a student anyway, so it actually saves you a bit of money. But then you find you're having a croissant for breakfast instead of eggs, or a ready meal instead of a steak and some salad or whatever. So you start getting into some poor habits straight away. Through a lot of my all of my 20s, then it was kind of vegetarian. And then I went to a Western Price conference in 2010 and saw Sally Fallon Morell present on vitamins and the fact that there's an animal form of vitamins and there's a plant form of vitamins. And I had no idea. I mean, why would I know that? You don't get taught nutrition in school. Doctors don't get taught nutrition. They have 7 years at medical school over here. Doctors have contacted me to say we had half a day of nutrition in that 7 years. I mean, they don't know any of what I present at conferences in terms of what is food and where do you find nutrients and all the rest of the things. So she was talking about particularly vitamin A coming in two forms. There's retinol, which is the form that the body wants, and that's what you get in animal foods. And then there's carotene, which is in plant foods. That's what you might get in carrots or whatever. And people assume that you can convert from one to the other. I didn't assume. I hadn't even thought about it. Went veggie. I had absolutely no idea. What nutrients do I need? Why do I need them? Where do I find them? Trust me, that does not enter your head. The day that you go veggie, you just decide, oh, I don't want to be eating animals anymore. You have not a clue why you eat and what you're about to do to your health. And I'd had a couple of eye operations and suddenly realized that they were completely unnecessary, because while I was mostly vegetarian, there was a period around 98, 99 where I had lapsed into veganism. I started dating someone who I hadn't kind of realized was vegan. And I don't really cook. So he'd put something in front of me every night and I'm like, oh, great, I'll eat this. And then you suddenly realize when you look back, there was no eggs or dairy in it at all. So I'd actually kind of gone vegan at that time. So the first thing that pulled me out of the veganism, which actually after the eye operations kind of started me back on a healthier path, was I was HR director at a London company at the time. And someone approached me and said, I've got this little coffee stand and I'd like to set one up in your canteen, because we were a pretty big business. And it will stop your staff going out to, I mean, I don't even think we had, that many competitions locally. We were in quite a sort of industrial area. I think it'd be really popular with your staff. And it was. I mean, it was just fantastic coffee. You could have your espresso or your latte or whatever. So I started having lattes quite regularly. And of course, that was getting me some animal foods back. And even though that's not the richest source of retinol, there was enough in it to start me down the route of getting some actual retinol back into my diet. Surprising number of people don't convert carotene to retinol. Apparently diabetics are very poor converters. And clearly I'm a poor converter. And if only my eye surgeon, when I walked in, had said, okay, young female, they're neurotic. He should have said, something's changed. For you to walk in with a really unusual eye condition, something's changed. So what has changed? Have you changed your diet maybe? And then I've gone, oh yeah, probably. Why didn't he know anything about retinol And the key nutrient that your eye needs, what are you doing being an eye surgeon when you don't even know what retinol is or where it's found, or asking your patients, have you done anything to cut off your supply of retinol recently? I mean, it's just criminal how little is known by the medical profession. And I was listening to Sally Fallon Morell, and it was just like, oh my goodness, I never needed 2 eye operations. I just needed to eat properly. And then I heard a presentation by Barry Groves, and he did a brilliant presentation. You might be able to find it on the internet somewhere, called Homo Carnivorous. And it was man is a carnivore animal. And he was going through the gorilla digestive system, the cow digestive system, how we're much more akin to a sort of omnivore digestive system, and why we need to be eating animal foods as part of our omnivore diet. And I went home and said to hubby, that's it, I'm not veggie anymore. Get cooking the steak. And he was very happy, obviously, because he was doing 2 meals every night for 10 years, poor guy. So that all stopped.
So you mentioned these different forms of vitamins depending on if they're from plant or animal, and specifically you got into the retinol. What other things do vegans need to be wary about that they're missing out on?
Loads.
And then I want to take it the other way, where things they might be getting from too many plants that are causing a detriment to their health.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is easy and serious. So if you go through the vitamins, you've got the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. So A, you want retinol, and that's what animals deliver, and plants deliver carotene. D, you want D3, and you get plants deliver D2. So you're getting the wrong form if you're only eating plants. E, you can get from plant foods, particularly sunflower seeds, interestingly. And then K again, you've got sort of K1, K2. You can get K2 from those sort of fermented foods, but you'll get them more naturally in your sort of dairy products. Go into the water soluble vitamins. The obvious one is B12. That is only found in animal foods. The rest you'll find in other foods, but you won't find them to the extent and in the right balance that you're doing, for example, meat or eggs. They're really good for the B vitamins. Go on to minerals, and then you'd expect plants to do well, because minerals are found in foods that come from the trees and the ground. They're actually still more richly found in animal foods, because the animals are processing the minerals for you by grazing on the land and doing the good digestion for you. So the most absorbable form of the minerals, iron, zinc, again, come from animal foods. So heme iron, red meat and seafood. Zinc, the most absorbable form, comes from the animal foods. What are the other ones? I mean, your bone nutrients are just so densely found in fish and dairy, as opposed to your plant foods. So there are many, and that's on the micronutrient side. Go back to the macronutrients. Your essential complete proteins are found in animal food. Yeah, you can get the essential amino acid in plant foods, but you've got to start plant combining. And not everybody does. Most people don't even know that they need to do it. And then I've had a look at doing that, or had a look at sort of the composition of chickpeas versus eggs. You end up getting too much of some things and not enough of others. So you end up getting an imbalance in just a different way. And the essential fatty acids, the body wants omega-3 in the form of EPA and DHA. Flax seeds, for example, will provide ALA. That's not what the body wants. Again, you can convert, but not everybody can. And it's a very, very poor conversion rate. So there really is no substitute for the oily fish, or at least taking the omega-3 supplements. But of course, my vegetarian niece won't take the omega-3 supplements because she says, well, they come from fish. I'm not putting anything that comes from fish in my mouth. That's your brain. It's not my brain. It's your problem, not mine.
Well, it's interesting. There's this divide in the health space where people that are sick tend to gravitate towards either a carnivore diet or a vegan diet, the extremes.
Yeah.
And from the outside, it does appear that people heal within both of those realms. And you've just gone over with an all plant diet, the deficiencies. What do you think it is about that diet that people are apparently healing? Is it just because it's so short term? Because it's better, again, than the standard American or
You've got it.
standard Western diet?
Yeah, that's what
I'll
it
have you
is.
take it from there.
Yeah, that's what it is. So if you take anyone who's following the standard American diet or the UK advised diet, and then they go on any whole foods diet, whether it's predominantly animal foods, predominantly plant foods, or a pretty good mix, any move to a whole food diet is going to do the trick, which is why first thing I say is cut out your processed food. Just get it out of your diet. It's not going to help in any way. You can do quite well then on that plant only. So if you call a vegan diet plant only, it's not having eggs or dairy. You can do okay on that in the short term. It will be until one of the deficiencies catches up with you. So if you do a vegan diet and you supplement well, and if you go on my site and you put in the word veganuary, we have this, I don't know if you have that over there. We have this campaign that happens in January where the Vegan Society is trying to get people to do veganuary, which is go vegan in January. So there's a post on my site where I've got the veganuary own website, and I just look at their own information and all the areas where they tell you you're going to be deficient, you need to supplement. So when they're honest with you, they will actually tell you you're going to be deficient in all of those things, so make sure you supplement. So if you've got people who are supplementing well, they can endure it longer. You've still got the problem with the complete protein and the essential fatty acids. Maybe they're good converters of carotene. Maybe they're good converters of ALA, essential fatty acids. There will be some people who do better on those diets than others. And you have a lot of vegan influencers that you have loads of followers and look amazing. And then they have to come out one day, and it might be after a year, it might be after 5 years. And they come out with that statement of, guys, I'm really sorry to tell you I've had to go back to eating fish and eggs because I was getting sick and this was happening. And they just get vilified. I mean, their followers aren't kind of like, oh, okay, I understand. I don't want you to die. I don't want you to lose your eyesight. I don't want you to be really unhealthy. They just get attacked. You traitor. I thought you were my sort of vegan hero or whatever. But a lot of people at some point, there are very few people start vegan sort of late teens, early 20s or whatever, and are still vegan at sort of 60, 70. The profile of vegan is very female, very young, and very sort of activist. It's not, sort of 70-year-old male.
Then there's the whole other aspect of the vegan conversation where the part we just talked about is somewhat mainstream, at least people poking holes. But then there's the whole aspect of plant toxins, things like oxalates and lectins and phytates. And there's so many different toxins in that realm that can lock up nutrients and even hinder some of the nutrients if somebody's having an omnivore diet. So it can not only, block some of what they could have got from some of those animal foods. So two different sides to this argument that are both not in favor of eating that way.
Yeah. I mean, my go-to on that is Georgia Reed, Dr. Georgia Reed. She's just got a book that's come out on change your diet, change your mind. And it's about the impact that plants can have on our mental health, as well as our whole well-being. So I would defer to Georgia on that one. Personally, they're not a problem for me. I don't find I eat anything and I experience any sort of discomfort in terms of the plants that I do eat. But Georgia has stayed at our house, and she'll give you a list before she comes. I asked for, and I want to make sure that I'm giving her stuff that's not going to make her feel bad. And I can't remember what's on the list, but there are some vegetables that are on the list, and there are some vegetables that are not on the list. So she's worked out that some vegetables are fine, and some vegetables don't work well with her, make her feel unwell. Brain foggy, bloated, digestively not happy. But there are also some animal foods that she doesn't do so well on. So fluid dairy, some meats are better than others. People who are very in tune with their health and their body, and people who are more sensitive to certain things. I think my whole digestive system is pretty robust, actually. But for some people, it's not. And, I did a podcast with Anthony Chafee recently, and he was saying, he'd lapsed from carnivore and then gone back to it. And he felt he'd lost a period of his life. He had regret that he hadn't stayed carnivore during that period because he just feels so great now. It's kind of, what a waste that I didn't stay optimally healthy throughout that period. I missed out on those years of just feeling 100%. Within Eat Real Food, there are some individualities, but there's no one who shouldn't eat real food. Anyone who thinks they can have any kind of decent quantity of processed food in their diet and feel great is deluding themselves.
Thankfully, one of the messages that seems to be really perforating through in the health and wellness space is the detriment of seed oils.
Sure.
It seems like no matter what diet in the health space, again, not mainstream yet, hopefully over time, everybody is agreeing that seed oils are toxic, and it's beyond the acute detriment that that is to your health, and they actually stay in your body for years and cause problems. So talk about seed oils and how you look at those.
Well, do you know what? I don't. Again, if someone else has done a great job of a particular topic, I don't feel any need to go and look at it myself. So it's like, thank you, Georgia, you've done plants. Chris Kresser, you did nitrates in bacon or whatever. I don't need. That's the go-to post. A number of good people have looked at seed oil. So Gary Taubes did a lot with his early fat work in articles and then his books. Nina Teicholz, really took it to the right level in Big Fat Surprise. David Gillespie, Toxic Oils, again, has done a great job. So I don't feel I need to look at that. In terms of, what's the worst thing about them? I guess it's the way that we demonize saturated fat and then everyone was, replace it with these highly polyunsaturated fats. That was just such a bad move, particularly in terms of cooking, because as you say, they stay in the body for a long period of time. When we're cooking with these highly unsaturated, I call saturated fat stable fat, and monounsaturated fat is monostable fat, and polyunsaturated fat is polyunstable fat. So it's many instabilities. And of course, that then mutates at high temperatures. So this whole idea that we stopped cooking fries in lard and then started cooking them in vegetable oils. That's the worst thing we did. The potato isn't the worst bit of the potato fries. It's what we changed to cooking it in. And it mutates at high temperatures and it's likely carcinogenic. It's the stuff that then goes into our, it effectively turns into a trans fat. So they say, we banned trans fats. We took them out of the food supply. It's like, yeah, and then you tell us to cook in highly unsaturated, unstable oils and just put a different means of trans fats back into our body. They're just so not good news. And you look at any fake food, it's basically comprised of sugar, flour, and vegetable oils, or seed oils, or plant oils, or whatever people want to call them. But it's those three fake substances, and then they can be molded into ice cream or cookies or donuts. It's the same three ingredients, just in different forms.
One of the big hangups for people that have tuned into this point and want to cut down on carbs and include more animal products and less carbohydrates from plants is what you just touched on, saturated fat. Talk about why that is a myth and people don't need to fear that.
First of all, some facts about fat. So if you go back to when I was talking about macronutrients at the beginning, so the only 100% carbohydrate on the planet is sucrose. And then at the other end, the 100% fats are your oils. So whether it's coconut oil or olive oil or sunflower oil, your oils are 100% fat. So even butter isn't 100% fat. It's got some protein and it's got some water in. So you've then got that sort of middle group that's got protein in it. But in that middle group, having said you've got carb proteins and you've got fat proteins, nature puts a trace of fat in virtually everything. So even the carb proteins have got a trace of fat, not enough to make those foods craveable or moreish or to upset the sort of the whole, insulin, not eating carbs and fats at the same time, but just a trace. And then you sort of think, well, why would nature put a trace of fat in every single food on the planet other than sucrose if somehow it were trying to kill us? And the second interesting factoid about fat is that every single food that contains fat contains all three fats: saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. So you have dietitians say things like, meat is full of saturated fat. It's like, no, it's not. Take a typical steak from the United States Department of Agriculture database, put 100 grams of steak in front of you raw, so it's not affected by cooking. 71% of it is water. 21% of it is protein. You've got about 1% of ash and minerals, 7% is fat. Of those 7 percentage points that are fat, 2 are saturated fat. So the main fat in meat is not saturated fat. The main fat in meat is usually monounsaturated fat. I can't find one meat where you've got more saturated fat than mono and poly added together. And usually the single highest fat is the monounsaturated fat. So the third interesting fact about fat is the only food group that's got more saturated fat than unsaturated fat is dairy products. So milk, even if it's low fat, is going to have more saturated than unsaturated fat. Not because saturated is bad and the other is good, but just to state a nutritional fact. So when you realize that even strawberries have got a trace of fat in them, which means they've got a trace of saturated fat in them. If you honest to God think that nature put saturated fat in every single food on this planet because somehow it's trying to kill us, then you've lost the plot. You know, there's nothing in real food that is trying to kill us. There just isn't. I mean, it's just literally insane. So my PhD, this is then in my home turf, because my PhD was looking back to say, I was fascinated by obesity. So, you know, obesity took off like an airplane in the US in the late 1970s, in the UK in the early 1980s. You look back, what happened at that time? We changed our dietary guidelines. What did we do? We put in a guideline. This is good, actually. We're going to come full circle just before the end. We put in a guideline that said, thou shalt have no more than 30% of those calories in the form of fat, which was the thing that then made it so that we have to eat 55% of our diet in the form of carbohydrate. But I looked at what the evidence base was for that guideline, 30% total fat. And then there was a secondary guideline, which was you should have no more than 10% of your calories in the form of saturated fat. So I went back to say, so my PhD basically said, in fact, that's my PhD title, that's my PhD in the camera, that's my PhD in the form of a book. And I basically went back to say, okay, if I were the dietary guideline committee at the time, let's say I'm there 1977 in the US, 1983 in the UK, what evidence is available to me? And I'm going to use the modern technique of systematic review and meta-analysis. So there's no cherry picking. I'm going to look at what were the randomized controlled trials available at the time, and there were only 6. What were the epidemiological studies that were available at the time? That I think there was only 6 of those as well. Pull all of that evidence together in meta-analysis. So again, there's no cherry picking. And did it provide support for the introduction of those 2 dietary fat guidelines? And to cut to the chase, the answer is no. None whatsoever. Not even a little tiny, just none. Just none literally whatsoever. So then I said, okay, that was then. I'm actually doing my PhD in 2016. So we've had other studies since then. We've had the Women's Health Initiative as a randomized controlled trial. We've had the Minnesota Coronary Survey, more epidemiological studies, the eBray study. Bring it up to date. Let's pull all of the evidence that we've got available at the time we're doing the PhD. Was there any more evidence for the 30% fat, 10% saturated fat? Cut to the chase, the answer is no. Still no further evidence. And the final paper from my PhD, because you should put your own research in the context of other people's research, was, of course, to say I wasn't the only person who looked at this. There were, I think, 7 other teams. When you publish a paper, you've got a number of findings. So let's say my first paper would have a finding for all-cause mortality, for total fat, all-cause mortality, saturated fat, heart disease, deaths, total fat, heart disease, death, saturated fat. So that would be 4 findings. So across these 7 teams, there were 40 different findings, and 37 of them found nothing. Now, one of them found, the Chowdhury 2014 study found that trans fats was a problem. None of us would disagree with that. We would all say trans fats are pretty evil. And then the only actual finding was there was a study from Hooper, which was the one that the government wanted to rely on. And then they just repeated the same study. So the same team, it was basically the same finding. So you're down to 1 finding in 40. And if I can, I can remember it. They said, we found an association with CVD events and saturated fat, but we found nothing for all-cause mortality, nothing for CVD mortality, nothing for CHD mortality, nothing for strokes, nothing for myocardial infarctions, nothing. Oh, but we had this 1 finding, so we're going to trumpet that from the rooftops. So the totality of the evidence is basically naff all. But people don't know that. It's like the fiber thing. When it becomes ingrained as part of the nutritional mythology, you could stop 100 people in your local town and say, is fat bad for you? And they would say, yes. And then you'd say, what's the evidence behind that? They wouldn't know. If you say to them, what is saturated fat? They wouldn't know. If they say, what is saturated fat found in? They wouldn't know. Do strawberries contain saturated fat? They will probably say no. is meat full of saturated fat? They would probably say yes. Yeah, they have absolutely not a flipping clue. And that's where we are with nutrition.
What do you think it's going to take to change it?
I think of it as a pyramid, not the food pyramid, but as a pyramid. And the best way to change it, the one that would have the biggest impact on the most people, would be for dietary guidelines to change, which is what Nina Teicholz has been trying to achieve over a number of years. Much as I love Nina and much as I would love her to succeed, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's ever going to happen, because they would have to admit how wrong they got it. And I think they would open themselves up for lawsuits. It's kind of like, what do you mean I shouldn't be having 55% of my diet in the form of carbohydrate? Are you now telling me that's what made me obese and type 2 diabetic and probably clogged up my arteries and gave me sort of carcinogenic propensity? It would be too dangerous. They'd have too many lawsuits. So that's not going to happen. What is happening is what we're a part of, which is the bottom-up revolution. So people get to the point that they feel bad. The number one reason for walking into the family doctor is tired all the time. And people walk in and say, Doc, I just feel tired all the time. And a lot of people go through their whole life and waste their whole life feeling tired all the time. And then a number of people will go online and just say, this isn't right. And then they'll come across your podcast or they'll come across a book and they'll say, wow, these people seem to have a lot of energy and they're looking good and they're looking slim and they've got nice looking skin and they look pretty healthy. I fancy me some of that. What are they doing? So the bottom up revolution is individuals taking charge of their own health. And that then spreads. And it spreads in quite a good ratio. So one person might influence two people, those might influence two people, and suddenly you've got the money on the chessboard. And it can be quite powerful because people see somebody, it's like, whoa, you've lost 50 pounds. You look great. Yeah. And I've reversed my type 2 diabetes. Wow. How did you do that? And a lot of people are getting into this field because of type 2 diabetes, because they're starting to realize my eyesight's going. And I hear that if I don't get my sugars under control, I might be looking at amputations in 10 years' time. And that really scares people into action. In terms of, I used to be an HR director in my first life and now doing what I do, what motivates people has been a consistent fascination through those two careers. There's only two things that motivate people. You move towards pleasure and you move away from pain, and that's it. And the most powerful motivator by far is moving away from pain. So if you're in a burning building, you will get out of the building a lot faster than you would if you're in the building and it's a nice day and you think, oh, it'd be nice to be outside. Pain is much stronger than pleasure. So it's not until a lot of people get type 2 diabetes or they get to the point that they can't play with their children, they can't bend down on the floor, that they actually realize, I need to do something about this now. They look around, they realize that the guidelines have failed them, eating less has failed them, it's just made them fatter and sicker. And if they're lucky, they come across one of us and they come into this healthy world and take control and feel great, and then feel a little bit annoyed that they had to find this out for themselves and then become disciples and tell lots of other people. The most powerful bit is if you imagine there's a sort of line in the middle bit of the pyramid, and that's doctors. And that's who we need to get to, because for every person you convert their family and a few friends. For every doctor you can convert 1,000 patients. They are the really, really powerful ones. So, if people say, oh, will you come and speak? Because I don't charge. If people say, will you come and do a talk? I'll say it depends who the audience is. And I would sooner talk to 10 health professionals, let's say, than 500 non-health professionals, because that those 10 health professionals might each influence another 1,000 people if you can get them on board. So that's the middle layer that we've got to go after. I mean, Nina, please plow on, do what you're doing. If nothing else, you're putting it on the record that you were told this is making people obese and diabetic. You can't, it's going to be like the cigarette companies one day, when they all, that famous footage where all 7 of them are lined up in a courtroom saying, oh, I never knew it was carcinogenic. No, I never knew smoking was carcinogenic. And they all swear an oath. And then somebody produces the paper that says, actually, you did know, because this document was shared with you beforehand. And then suddenly they've all committed a crime. So she's putting them on notice that you are committing a crime against health and humanity. But they won't stop. We've got to get to doctors and we've got to keep doing what we're doing with individuals.
Have you seen a positive shift in the last number of years that people are hearing this message and it's resonating?
Yeah, what I am seeing, it's quite interesting. So the narrative is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the narrative is getting more anti-meat, more plant-based. They've almost given up sometimes on the nutrition message. Even if you get a paper now saying, oh, red meat is going to give, that one in November, red meat is going to give you diabetes. For crying out loud, how? When did red meat ever come with glucose? Oh, when it has a burger and a bun with it and a fizzy drink. Okay, now that might be the mechanism. But they come out with the most stupid things. But now more and more, the papers are nutrition and the environment, because, cows burp and that's going to cause global warming. I tweeted something yesterday, I put a picture of ultra processed food. Somebody had done this great photo with about 1,000 ultra processed foods in this little sort of 3 by 2 inch diagram, and it's like, yeah, and cows are the problem. Come on, guys. But they're increasingly put it in environmental terms. The message that animals are bad, plants are good, is as relentless as ever. It's absolutely relentless. What I do every week is analyze an academic paper in the literature. My positioning is I do it so that you don't have to. You'll get 5, 6, 7 executive summary bullet points you can read in 2 minutes, and you've got the measure of the whole latest bit of nonsense that you've seen in Medscape or the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever. But they're thick and fast. I can't even keep up with the nonsense that I should dissect. But at the same time, more and more people are taking their health into their own hands and realizing that how we're being told to eat is not making them feel good. And the internet has enabled this. It's woken people up. You don't have to go to a conference. You just go online and say, I don't know, I don't feel well. And something might pop up, and you might go down a rabbit hole, and you might come across someone, and you might watch a video and it will change your life. People remember where they were, like I remember where I was at that Western Price conference when I took on board a message that I knew was going to change my own health and my own diet.
And a beautiful thing about this, everything we shared today, for somebody that it's brand new information, it can be overwhelming, but it is all very simple. It's not going to be easy because everybody has ingrained habits and their ways, but nothing we've said is overly complex and people can do this on their own for the most part. Unless the interesting part is if they're on medications, that's when things can get tricky and they need to be careful as they're healing
Mm.
if they were given dosages while they were unhealthy. But that's a side point. The point I'm trying to make is that this is straightforward, foundational, and there is hope for people. So if they do tune into something like this, there is hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The difference in how you feel when you're not eating the amount of carbohydrate that they want you to eat, when you don't have a carb hangover the next morning, when you don't have these fluctuations in energy, when you are in ketosis at some point in the day and you don't feel hungry and you feel you're working really well and you can power through if you're making a breakthrough in your work or something. That should be available to everyone. The idea that it isn't, it's just criminal. It really is. They're harming people. And of course, big food, people sometimes joke and say, is big food working with big pharma? Well, it might as well be, because the food makes you sick and then the drugs are supposed to mop up making you sick. How many people are on omeprazole or whatever? Antacids, the stomach is the most acidic environment on the planet. Why would you want to make it less acidic? If you've got stomach problems, it's not acidic enough. So maybe think about having apple cider vinegar, but whatever you do, don't start chucking acids into it. And then, statins, let's stop the body doing what it's designed to do. It's designed to produce cholesterol. It doesn't rely on you having to eat cholesterol. It's so important, it produces it for you. So we, in our infinite wisdom, say, well, let's block that pathway. It's called the mevalonate pathway. Let's block it. Let's block it right up at the top, at the HMG reductase enzyme level. And, okay, CoQ10 is further downstream. That's the body's energy spark plug. Oh, never mind. See how that goes. We play God. We think we've hijacked the brain's neurotransmitter pathway or something. Again, on my site, if you put in antidepressants in the search box. There's an incredible article, September 22, published in The Lancet, where a team had said, we assume that antidepressants are working by the serotonin reuptake inhibition, but are they? And they asked 6 or 7, I think it was, brilliant research questions. And they said, okay, let's test each one. The answer to that one is no. The answer to that one is no. The answer to that one is no. It was an incredible piece of research, completely blowing away the whole rationale for antidepressants. And I would wager you probably never heard of it. And nor have most people who take antidepressants, because it's not in the interest of the drug company that stuff ever becomes known. I'm surprised it was even published, quite frankly, because usually that kind of research doesn't get funded or published.
So much of it is just so backwards, which takes me back to, you brought up the meat and diabetes study that's relatively new. The interesting thing is, if you flip that around, consuming less carbs and upping your meat is going to come back to what we talked about before. You're going to bring down your blood glucose, bring down your insulin, and you're going to go further and further from type 2 diabetes, following the opposite of what that science says.
Exactly. I mean, it's gone from just being wrong to being upside down wrong. Eat plants, no, eat animal foods. It's just upside down wrong.
But again, there is hope in all of this, and the message is relatively straightforward and simple.
Yeah,
so we'll leave it at that for people. The fact that, we don't want to leave on doom and gloom, because there is a lot of hope here, and a lot of, since we are sort of at rock bottom, there's only really going up from here. And people are tuning into what they need to do and taking the power back in their own hands. You mentioned the internet. It's just such a powerful tool for people to realize these alternative narratives. So there is hope.
I mean, for me, it's really easy. And these are the messages that I will present. Yeah, I always put the slide in, okay, what should we eat? I've told you what they've got wrong, but I'm going to tell you what you should eat. Number 1, eat real food. That's where we started. Number 2, choose that food for the nutrients it provides. So when you know about essential fats, complete protein, vitamins and minerals, they are found in meat, fish, eggs and dairy. And then number 3, eat a maximum of 3 times a day. Okay, I eat 4 times a day because I'm having this lockdown chocolate mousse and the world still hasn't gone completely non-mad. So I still have it, but I don't have a weight problem. I don't have diabetes, so I don't care, kind of thing. In fact, if anything, I probably need to keep my weight up. But if you're trying to do anything about weight, it's a really good idea to eat a maximum of 3 times a day. If you don't like breakfast, don't have it. But don't do this grazing thing that dietitians tell you to do. That cows graze all day long and look at the size of them. That's not going to work well. But it is really easy and you can do it. And it's going to make you feel so much better that your only regret will be that you wished you'd done it sooner. That'll be the only regret.
Well, Zoe, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing this message. We're going to link up your books, your website, your social media. And I just want to thank you again, and thank you for what you do in the world.
Thank you very much, and to you. And thank you very much for having me.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to head over here and catch this next incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Once you understand where the non-science is coming from, where the propaganda is coming from, and it is industry, pharmaceutical, and religious ideology, now I understand why I was conned in my